This story starts with a girl who works at a supermarket and absolutely despises her life. Suddenly, she finds herself in a strange place and has no idea what is happening to her. She notices a peculiar mirror and feels compelled to go towards it. To her surprise, she sees another person in her reflection and is left speechless. The only thing she has left from her previous life is some merchandise from her last job. Before she can figure out what is going on, she realizes she is famished and starts searching for a kitchen or dining room. However, at that moment, two boys approach her, complaining about their hunger and demanding food. Unable to think of anything else, she offers them the instant noodles she has in her hand. Suddenly, one of the boys becomes angry, thinking that the stranger is trying to poison them. In response, the girl assures them that if they have any concerns, she can prove that the food is safe. The children start observing her with interest as she tries to alleviate their fears. They regret turning down such a delicious and incredibly flavorful lunch. The girl notices their curiosity about the dish and offers to let them try the noodles. However, before they do, she warns them that it might be a little hot. Judging by the first child's reaction, it seems like he has never had something like this before, but he loves it. He mentions that despite the broth being too hot, it is still very tasty and unique. Meanwhile, the second child, who was initially skeptical, continues to stand back with a distrustful stare. To convince him, the first child assures him that it is safe and suggests that he tries it himself to be sure. It is clear that the second child wants to try it, but for some reason, he refuses to believe them. After a few minutes, his hunger becomes unbearable, and he can no longer resist. He finally approaches the girl, ready to give it a try. She once again cautioned that before consuming these noodles, they must be properly cooled down. This eliminated any reason for him to distrust her. As a result, they took turns requesting some noodles. The taste was so delicious that the girl struggled to keep up with feeding them in turns. Just a few minutes later, they finished this enormous portion and were overjoyed. The brothers were so exhausted that they couldn't even stand up and go to their room. At this point, the girl reminded them that lying on the floor immediately after eating would hinder digestion. However, she heard something unexpected in response. The boys asked if she hadn't said they should be on the floor, and then they called her by the name Eileen. It was the first time she heard her new name. It turned out that she had been reborn into the body and life of a girl named Eileen. A little later, she was informed that she could usually throw their food on the floor. Unfortunately, the kids had become accustomed to her behavior until now. In that moment, Eileen immediately understood why one of the boys was hesitant to try new food. Meanwhile, memories flooded into her mind like a tsunami. She vividly remembered a story about a character named Elsius who becomes a saint through healing men. She even recalled the names of every character in the story, including Eileen, whose body she had entered a few hours earlier. Eileen was the nanny of twin princes born to a concubine and served as an assistant. She was the main caretaker who mistreated abandoned children and turned them into villains. The boy who always smiled and was more trusting was named Louis, while the one who rarely smiled and was less happy was named Evan. Realizing that this was her new reality and convinced of it, Eileen didn't even know how to react. It was clear to her that each royal family possessed unique abilities. In the novel, Richard's Empire, the first emperor forms a bond with a dragon, making it his loyal companion. The children who inherit his family name possess extraordinary abilities, including incredible physical strength, a unique energy surpassing human capabilities, and sometimes even the power of foresight or overflowing magical abilities. Due to these exceptional gifts, when the twins reach the age of 8, their magical powers awaken. In the original story, they rebel against their babysitter and escape. At this point, the only question on the babysitter's mind is the age of the twins. They respond that they are now 8 years old. The babysitter immediately wonders if there is any way to alter her fate. Moreover, since she has been reborn into another body, she hopes to have some sort of romantic relationship. However, she is saddened by the fact that she is not in the main character's body and is destined to be a regular nanny, spending time with the children. Meanwhile, the female protagonist is dating attractive men, while Eileen, the babysitter, can only dream of such experiences and is fated to perish at the hands of the children. Eileen wonders if she can influence her destiny by improving her relationship with the children and regaining their trust. Not surprisingly, her first task is to rectify the wrongs of the previous body's owner. She makes them a clean bed, tidies the room, and tries to make it more comfortable. However, even after her efforts, their room still looks worse than any other in the house. At that moment, one of the twins approaches her and asks why she is being so kind today. The girl fails to realize the significance of Eileen's actions, as all she did was feed them regular supermarket noodles and brush their teeth. Nevertheless, Eileen decides to answer the question. Louis was overjoyed to hear the news that she would remain like this forever. He couldn't contain his happiness and expressed his joy openly. On the other hand, Evan, although less emotional, silently turned away to the other side of the bed. The girl's determination to never be afraid again and to experience a happy childhood grew even stronger. She believed that they didn't deserve the cruel treatment they had received. Sometime later, she went grocery shopping and unexpectedly came across a supermarket that resembled the one she used to work at. This moment brought forth a flood of thoughts and questions, as if she was caught between two worlds. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to enter and explore what the supermarket had to offer. However, her attention was immediately captured by a small white animal that she spotted. It darted around the store like a playful ball, piquing her curiosity even more. After a challenging pursuit, she managed to catch the animal in her hands. For a while, she couldn't figure out what kind of animal it was or if it had an owner. The confusion arose because it wasn't clear whether it was a puppy or a kitten. Furthermore, there was no one around who seemed to be looking for it. At that moment, Eileen happened to glance in another direction and was taken aback by what she saw. A big jar of chocolate caught her eye, and she immediately thought of the children who would enjoy it. She realized that the previous nanny had never bought them anything like that, even if she provided them with food. Eileen knew that this unexpected treat would surprise the children, even though there was no special occasion. Meanwhile, Eileen returned home and decided to check the twins' room, only to find that they were not there. Fear gripped her as she realized that they were missing. She might find herself in a serious predicament, but in order to avoid getting anxious beforehand, she made the decision to wait for them and not worry. Suddenly, she glanced down at her hands and noticed the exact same chocolate she had bought at the supermarket. However, for some reason, it seemed as though she had forgotten about purchasing it. Perhaps her nerves had affected her memory. She couldn't comprehend how it ended up there or who had bought it. To alleviate her stress, Eileen opened the can and decided to taste it. After a while, she still couldn't fathom how this could have happened and chose not to dwell on it. Dwelling on it would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on her children and tried to avoid her own downfall. Meanwhile, the girl heard a loud noise and realized it was the voices of the twin brothers. It turned out that at that moment, two assistants were teasing the children and purposely holding the bread high so they would try to reach it. Louis, as usual, followed their instructions, while his brother observed from the sidelines and attempted to intervene. Evan didn't want this to continue, especially with someone laughing at his brother. Meanwhile, just because Evan was upset, they were considering depriving the kids of dinner and, as usual, decided to punish the brothers for no reason. Suddenly, Evan reacted in time and prevented the assistant from touching his brother. Unfortunately, he doesn't always get his way. This time, after the boy's similar reaction, the helper became even angrier and decided to retaliate. It seemed to make no difference to her whether she was doing it to an adult or a defenseless child. Just as she was about to strike the child, something stopped her. Eileen had witnessed the situation just in time to see what was happening. She made a firm decision to protect the children and ensure that the girls faced the consequences for their cruelty. When she questioned them about the situation, the girls pretended they were innocently playing with the kids and that she had misunderstood. These words only fueled her anger and resentment. To verify the truth, she approached the kids and asked them to share their experience. The boys hesitated, torn between telling the truth and facing punishment. Eileen saw the fear in their eyes and realized the extent of their suffering that day. She took matters into her own hands and dealt with her colleagues herself. She was horrified by what the children had endured and how they had been treated by the nannies. The girl couldn't control herself and took turns hitting each of them. She had every right to do so because if she hadn't intervened, they would have continued mistreating the children. After that, Eileen yelled at them and declared that they could start looking for new jobs. According to the girl, no one has the right to treat children cruelly, regardless of how challenging their upbringing may be. Especially since Louis and Evan, the beautiful and calm kids, have managed to remain that way despite everything they've been through. The girls couldn't respond, and unfortunately, their silence wasn't out of remorse but out of fear of losing their jobs. They silently left the room without even apologizing for their behavior. Eileen then approached the kids and apologized for what they had to endure every day. She promised once again to prevent her subordinates from behaving in such a manner. The kids were definitely calmer, but there was still a chance that once the girl left the palace or went on business, the chaos could return. So, she knew she had to take action, and the sooner, the better. If she started protecting them, the children would be less likely to turn into villains, and Eileen wouldn't meet a horrible fate. The twins had been raised without love, but before she did anything, she decided to ask if they could at least try to trust her. That was the only way she could make a difference. Meanwhile, back at the Reborn palace, the assistant stood by his master, knowing he couldn't go to lunch or dinner before him. He understood that his master might need something at any moment. Although the assistant wasn't thrilled about these rules, he knew he couldn't refuse or disagree with his master. This time, the guy didn't seem to like today's dish and asked the assistant to report it to the chef. It was strange how such minor situations could leave the staff hungry and unable to voice their concerns. People were simply afraid of losing their jobs and especially of upsetting him. It could be dangerous. The next morning, the gentleman decided to go somewhere on his own business. When the assistant noticed, he offered to accompany him and help with any problems or give him advice. However, the gentleman insisted that it wasn't necessary and he would go to the tower by himself. In the meantime, the mansion where the young princes reside is surprisingly calm and much improved compared to before. It has been a month since the girl, now known as Eileen, started working in this house with the crown princes. She has fully embraced the nanny's life and strives to make the children feel as comfortable as possible. Eileen has established a daily routine, waking up early to cook them a delicious breakfast, watching them play while tidying up the palace, preparing lunch, and occasionally surprising them with desserts. After a snack and ensuring the children are content, she cleans up once again and puts them to bed after dinner. Although it is not a challenging task, she is determined to make the best of it for the sake of her future. In the meantime, she tries to spend as little time as possible in her own room. Every time she enters, she is amazed by the abundance of jewelry and ornaments, yet horrified by the realization that the real Eileen made the children eat spoiled food. This is why she sometimes chooses to sleep elsewhere. However, she must enter her room occasionally to use cleaning products and is reminded of her past life when she sees these objects, which were plentiful in her previous job. In her dreams, she consistently finds herself in the middle of an empty supermarket, with each dream being identical to the last. This repetition sparks a suspicion within her that there may be a clue or message hidden within. Throughout this time, she has discovered that she can only take one item at a time from the supermarket, and it must fit in her hand. Items from her current world cannot be brought into the supermarket. Meanwhile, one of the assistants approaches her to report the results of her work. She's done cleaning the windows and is thrilled to do anything else. This girl's name is Emma. It's really hard for her to sit idle, and every time she's asked to do something, Emma is as happy as if she had received a gift. She even enjoys new cleaning products or supplies for work. She really enjoys scrubbing floors so she can admire their shine and cleanliness. At this point, they barely noticed the little prince walking up to them. He turned to Eileen and asked if she had some time. He's very eager to tell her how he managed to climb a tree, something he hasn't been able to do for a long time. After that, he promised that the next time he went for a walk, he'd pick some apples for her. Then the boy said goodbye and went back outside. The girls asked him to be careful and began to admire this child because, in fact, they are really lucky. There are never any problems with twins, and they are very well-behaved children. It's very hard for Emma to imagine that after a while, this beautiful child could become a real villain. Though, in his shoes, it's not surprising at all that anyone who'd go through something like that would turn into a villain. She didn't realize that Evan was walking up to her at that moment. As soon as the girl asked how long he'd been standing there and if he'd like something to eat, the boy ignored her and just started running away somewhere. The girl didn't understand how to interpret it because she didn't hear a single word from him. Emma commented on the situation and said that the brothers have noticeably different personalities, to which Eileen replied that Evan was just a little shy. In fact, if no one had bullied him, things would have been very different in the story. The twins, after escaping and destroying the babysitter, hid in the home of the main character, Elsius. Everything was fine until the twins and Elsius started living together. The major event began when Kashar appeared, a former crown prince who had been dethroned. He is a minor character in this world. The girl vividly remembers the moment in the original story when the main character saved him, as a side effect of the medication caused him to faint. Elsius saved him and cured him of his insanity. The twins and Kashar decided to rescue the girl from the temple, but they never anticipated how challenging it would be. They fought tirelessly for a long time to retrieve her and carry out their plan. This became a significant conflict in the plot. Today, she will make soup in a clay pot she purchased from the supermarket, hoping to satisfy the children. Suddenly, Eileen noticed a man standing behind her. When she tried to defend herself, she accidentally broke some dishes and felt even more determined to seek revenge on this man. After a few minutes, the girl finally calmed down and decided to see who it was. As soon as she saw him on the floor, she deeply regretted hitting him, as she had no idea how he would react to the situation or how to explain everything to him. Even if the girl comes up with something, it does not guarantee his forgiveness. In the meantime, she has the perfect opportunity to admire his beauty without him noticing. Seeing such a man for the first time, she believes his appearance can be compared to works of art. Above all, she is captivated by his golden hair, which looks far superior to that of many girls. After some time, it becomes apparent that Eileen hadn't even considered the fact that he wasn't just an ordinary guy. He is none other than Kashar, a member of the royal family. Eileen is now uncertain who else in the entire empire could possibly have such blonde hair. To confirm her assumption, she mustered up the courage to check his eye color. Among all the characters in the story, her favorite is a handsome famous guy with blonde hair and red eyes. When Eileen saw his eyes light up, she couldn't believe that it wasn't a dream. It was actually happening in reality. The girl couldn't even fathom the idea of ever being able to touch him, let alone accidentally bump into him. In the original story, he suffered from a disease that made him incredibly violent and caused harm to many people. The emperor is unaware that the true cause of this disease is a curse. To suppress his madness, he consumed a poisonous fruit. The longer he consumed it, the more severe the side effects became, including intense headaches and more. This means that if he reacts aggressively to this situation, Eileen risks losing her life much sooner. Therefore, she has no choice but to come up with a plan and try to rectify this situation. Eileen is certain that if Kashar wakes up, there will be no mercy or treatment to be expected. This realization makes her even more anxious because he could awaken at any moment. At this point, she needs to figure out how to explain the situation and, if possible, calm him down. She understands that it's nearly impossible, but due to the stress, she couldn't think of a better solution than taking him to the woods to address the problem. Eileen knows this man very well and understands that in such a situation, one must proceed with extreme caution and plan every step and word carefully. Despite the risks involved, she consciously decides to take him to a secluded place where there are no people. From an external perspective, it appears incredibly strange, but is it preferable to wait for him to wake up and simply apologize? Actually, if Kashar were to wake up suddenly, he might think he's being kidnapped, and the consequences would be much more severe and irreversible than the current situation in the kitchen. We can only hope that the girl has some sort of plan to keep herself alive or at least prevent the situation from worsening. On her way to the forest, she keeps pausing to gaze at the tower and forgetting her purpose. I'm genuinely curious about her next move because, thus far, it's difficult to believe that this idea won't exacerbate things. It turns out that she was so intrigued by the tower because the emperor's wife, who bore him a deranged son, was kept there. Kashar visits the tower every year, which is why he was in the vicinity and ended up in one of the nearby mansions. As soon as the girl became distracted once again, Kashar suddenly woke up and immediately attempted to disarm the stranger and ascertain her identity and intentions. Typically, such actions are met with severe punishment. Surprisingly, instead of being frightened and attempting to free herself, Eileen began to admire his appearance. However, this admiration was short-lived as she began to recognize the risks and noticed his angry expression, which grew more aggressive by the second. It was evident that ignoring his question would not be wise. In response, the girl asked if he remembered what happened before losing consciousness. She truly hoped he didn't. Then, forgetting her initial plan, she started yelling and explaining that she saw him as a villain and was merely defending herself. She is incredibly confused and unsure of what to do in this situation, or if she should say anything at all. She didn't even realize how she gradually started losing consciousness and closing her eyes. Surprisingly, the guy ceased his aggression and attempted to save her, realizing that there was no point in her deceiving him. Upon waking up, she found herself on the verge of tears. She desperately pleaded for his forgiveness and made a promise to tell him anything he wanted to know. Kashar continued to gaze into her eyes and decided to gradually ask her various questions. As he touched his head, he suddenly felt a bump, indicating that her punch had quite an impact. If the villain had been real, she could have easily punished him. However, taking advantage of the guy's distraction, Eileen abruptly stood up and began running away. Just as she heard a warning that she would deeply regret it if she kept running, she immediately stopped and started apologizing for her behavior. Before receiving any response, she explained that if he punished and destroyed her, no one would be able to save the two princes except her. Intrigued, the guy asked her to elaborate on what she meant. Eileen realized that she had successfully captured Kashar's interest, which made her feel a little relieved. She proceeded to explain about the twin brothers she was trying to rescue and how her appearance was connected to their plight. Instantly, he recognized Eileen as one of the maids in the mansion. The conversation continued to be unclear and illogical, but to verify her truthfulness, Kashar decided to leave her alone for now. However, he warned her that if he discovered she had deceived him after speaking to those she was helping, he wouldn't be so forgiving. Afterward, he instructed her to lead the way to the two brothers, ensuring he could monitor her every move. As they journeyed back, an unusual silence fell between them, with not a single word exchanged. On their way back, as soon as they entered the mansion, Kashar recalled the situation and wanted to know what she had hit him with. The girl replied that if he was truly interested, she wouldn't hide it. Eileen showed him the same huge and heavy skillet that happened to be nearby at that moment. After that, another awkward situation arose as it wasn't clear how to continue the conversation with him around. The girl was afraid to say anything that he might not like or sound too suspicious. Meanwhile, upon hearing some noise, the children immediately left the room to investigate its source. The boys were evidently surprised to see Nanny and a stranger together, as they had never seen them together before. One of them asked what was going on and why there were visitors without any warning. Apparently, the kids didn't know who was standing in front of them or what his name was. Louis suggested that this unknown guy was Eileen's lover and they were probably going on a date. The girl didn't even have time to reply as she imagined the trouble she might get into afterwards. She tried her best not to look him in the eye, feeling embarrassed in front of her boyfriend because she had been punishing him a lot lately. Suddenly, he decided not to stop and made it worse by suggesting that Kashar was some kind of villain. He took a piece of the broken bowl in his hand and started yelling loudly, refusing to let this man go. Eileen resigned herself to the fact that things were not going to get any better. It's getting worse every minute. She even suggested that Kashar might want to get rid of all of them. It feels like nothing more unexpected could happen after this, but then Eileen suddenly tells the kids that she and Kashar really do love each other. However, little did she know that her words would only add to the confusion and misunderstandings. Eileen is in such a desperate situation that she's willing to do anything, even if it means ignoring Kashar and focusing solely on getting the kids to their room as soon as possible. She wants to explain everything to them so that they won't doubt the truth of her words. That's why she invited Kashar over for breakfast and asked the kids to be friends with him. It's strange that Eileen would take such a risk, jeopardizing the calmness of the children and potentially hurting Kashar. She's hoping that everything will go smoothly, but it's highly unlikely. She doesn't know what Kashar is thinking, but for now, he's silently watching and pretending that they're really together. The stress Eileen must be feeling at this moment is unimaginable. If things don't go according to plan or if someone messes up, she's taking a huge risk and making the situation even worse. Meanwhile, while she's away, she asked Emma to make sure that the princes and Kashar don't spend any time alone, just in case something happens. And then, a guy approached Eileen and asked for this breakfast to be one of the best he's ever had. Realizing that he supports this charade and is willing to play along, Eileen replied that she's ready to do anything for the person she loves. But even after that, as she went to the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel nervous. Everything feels too uncertain. She has an opportunity to express her emotions without anyone noticing, and it appears normal from the outside. Meanwhile, Emma is still in the room, not leaving the guys alone as Eileen requested. As usual, Louis couldn't stay silent and asked an unpleasant question. He noticed a bulge on Kashar's head and inquired about its origin. Kashar didn't hold back and revealed that someone had tried to harm him and take him into the woods. Then, Louis casually suggested that Eileen might have hit him so hard. Of course, he asked if she had anything to do with it. Kashar confirmed that it was true and he wouldn't hide it. Suddenly, the girl overheard this answer and asked when she had done something like that, as if it never happened. In response, he diverted her attention to the outcome of that situation and questioned if that evidence wasn't enough to change the subject. Eileen expressed her opinion that the best remedy was a delicious breakfast made with love. Initially, her efforts were appreciated by the children who were delighted with her culinary skills because it was incredibly tasty. However, instead of gratitude and delight, the girl received numerous questions about it. To clarify the dish, she mentioned that it was a fish soup from her hometown. When Kashar decided to try something other than soup, the girl requested that he try the soup first. Afterwards, she felt very uncomfortable and regretted giving advice. The guy did take her advice and decided to follow her suggestion. At that moment, he looked at the dish as if he was either about to resent it or really liked it a lot. Eileen eagerly awaited his reaction, but at the same time, she was afraid to hear any criticism. However, the guy mentioned that the soup wasn't bad. The girl was thrilled to hear this because if he says it's not bad, it means he actually liked it but doesn't want to overpraise her. She had been punished for everything that had happened, but luckily he turned out to be kind and not as cruel as she had imagined. The girl hopes that thanks to the delicious lunch, he will become kinder and forget about the unpleasant situation. She is observing his every action and glance, and suddenly he asks how long it has been since they last met. Eileen didn't expect this to happen and was surprised that he continued to play along and show interest. The girl is pleased to be reminded that it has been about years since that moment. However, she hopes that Lou doesn't ruin this beautiful moment by asking some weird question. Little did she know, the guy had asked her that question for a reason. He wanted to take their relationship to a more serious level. The girl hinted that it was too much, but he seemed serious and it had nothing to do with their made-up legend. She wonders what he's up to and what it all means. Unfortunately, due to the presence of the children, Eileen can't ask him about it. As soon as the guy got up from his chair, she asked if it was time for him to leave or if something important had come up. However, he did it to get close enough to say something. He looked her straight in the eye and complimented her on the wonderful breakfast. From that point on, his actions became even more confusing. He asked her not to go anywhere and to wait for him here. After that, he made it clear that if she attempted to escape, it wouldn't end well. Eileen was completely bewildered and stopped comprehending his intentions and motives. All he had to do was stay silent and not refute what she was fabricating as a story. As a result, things have escalated, but it only adds to the intrigue. In the meantime, to ensure the man got home comfortably, his assistant came to pick him up. Kashar sat silently in the carriage, not uttering a single word to him. The man didn't even flinch or glance in his direction. He remained in one position for a long time, deep in thought. It's evident that he has something on his mind, most likely related to today and Eileen. Considering his peculiar nature, his behavior shouldn't be surprising. Some time ago, a neighboring country began devising plans and forming alliances, which ultimately led to conflict with his family. Despite having the chance to avoid it initially, they chose not to compromise. Consequently, the man was sent to defend the country, but he emerged even stronger. Kashar discovered his powers and used them against the enemy. Many have concluded that there is no one stronger than him in this world, earning him his title. Meanwhile, his assistant still can't fathom why he remains silent and suspects it may be connected to today's date and his memories of his mother's death. However, that assumption is far from the truth. Judging by the man's smile, he may have realized it a long time ago. Suddenly, Kashar finally addressed him, but for some reason, he didn't finish his sentence. He appears to be quite mysterious, and due to his silence, it's difficult to understand what it's all about at the moment. He shared with him something unexpected, which the assistant clearly didn't anticipate, that his master had met an intriguing girl. He wasn't ashamed to admit it, and it's strange that after a long time, he decided to discuss it with him. Kashar caught a familiar and pleasant scent, which brought back memories. It had been a while since he had felt something like this, as if his thoughts were all jumbled up in his head. Eileen came to his mind again, and he still couldn't comprehend how she could harm him, someone who couldn't be hurt by even the strongest opponents. Kashar's mind wandered so often to that day that he started forgetting important tasks. However, he still remembers the wonderful aroma of her special soup, and he believes it's what they call love at first sight. Despite his reluctance to admit it, he truly misses her and longs to see her again, to taste that incredible flavor that he can't forget. It's become so serious that he constantly imagines their next meeting, and he finds himself thinking more and more about what makes this girl so special. He's never experienced anything like this before, and instead of seeking revenge or punishment, he finds himself falling in love with her and unable to stop thinking about her. Kashar noticed that whenever he reminisces about that day, his mood improves and the negative thoughts fade away. Meanwhile, while traveling in a carriage, he asked his assistant if any members of the imperial family lived near the tower. The assistant informed him that 2 brothers reside there, prompting Kashar to request information about their babysitter. He mentioned that following their meeting and the lovely day, he found himself indebted to her. He was eager to make it up to her, and it was intriguing to see how he planned to do so. It was certain to be something unique and unexpected. The next day, she noticed unfamiliar faces arriving with flowers and gifts. However, she was yet to realize that they were all meant for her. The girl spotted diamond bracelets and exquisite jewelry, assuming it was all in preparation for an event. She had no idea that all those gifts had been given to her by Kashar, whom she least expected to receive them from. Just a few days ago, she had been thankful to him for not holding any grudges against her for her past actions. Initially, she attempted to return them as she still felt guilty, but upon receiving a letter from him, she changed her mind. The contents of the letter were rather demanding, warning her that if she refused the gifts, she would face dire consequences. This left her with a lot of conflicting thoughts. As typically, such gifts came with different intentions in the letters. The gifts kept coming for days on end, leaving Eileen feeling trapped. The children grew increasingly curious about the situation, not accustomed to so many strangers in their home. The girl started to feel anxious once again, anticipating the potential problems that could arise from the continuous influx of gifts. Meanwhile, a man greeted the brothers and decided to make them happy by telling them that there was something for the little princes here too. He showed them that in one of the boxes, there are many interesting toys that the little princes will definitely like. However, for some reason, the girl was unsure about what was going on and the gifts for the children gave her mixed feelings. It seemed like she was starting to worry about them. The boy noticed the babysitter's reaction and asked why she was acting that way and if he wasn't allowed to play with the toys. The girl replied that tomorrow morning she would bring something even better, as long as they didn't accept these questionable gifts. The boy became very upset. The girl couldn't bear to deny him anything because he looked at her with eyes as if he were about to cry. As a result, the boy started to enjoy his new toy and couldn't get enough of it. After a while, the girl asked the man how much all these toys might cost approximately. When the man named the price, the girl wasn't even surprised and was convinced that these were too expensive gifts and it wasn't necessary to give them in such a large quantity. Then, out of the blue, Evan approached her on his own and wanted to talk about something. The girl immediately asked him why he was here and how she could help him, assuming that his reason must be serious if he sought her out. In response, Evan asked if his nanny had any issues with the Duke. This caught Eileen off guard, and instead of answering, she asked him how he knew that the man who visited their house was truly a duke, since she hadn't mentioned it to him. The boy replied that it was too obvious and that he knew the imperial family better than his nanny did. Eileen reassured him that he didn't need to worry about it and promised that they wouldn't have any problems even if something happened. However, Evan clarified that his concern wasn't about that at all. He thought his nanny had been acting strangely lately. Eileen didn't even inquire further about what he meant and instead felt incredibly pleased, thinking it was adorable that Evan cared about her. She wondered if his babysitter had some kind of issue. The girl hugged the boy and thanked him for his concern, but Evan didn't seem happy with her reaction. He asked her what she was doing. Eileen became so absorbed in his attention that she forgot about everything else and stopped noticing anyone around her. Unfortunately, the boy didn't appreciate the hug, although maybe he was just pretending not to care about her. Once his nanny had calmed down, Evan continued the conversation and still wanted to know if she truly loved the Duke and if they had been dating for years. Just as Eileen decided to come clean and tell him the truth, the Duke approached them and questioned why she was still hiding their relationship, insisting that it didn't happen. The girl was taken aback by his sudden appearance, and as soon as she heard his voice, she became extremely frightened. The guy asked if she was scared of her lover. Kashar apologized for the unexpected surprise and explained that he had come to ask her out on a date. The girl asked for clarification because she was growing more and more afraid that he would seek revenge on her. Duke replied that he was disappointed because he had expected a different reaction from her, and she wasn't even happy about the date. This was all because Eileen was afraid of doing something she might regret. She didn't understand his intentions and why he was still pretending they were together. Suddenly, Evan decided to intervene and suggested they discuss the situation. However, Kashar tried to explain that it was an adult conversation and Evan should not get involved. If he was truly interested, he could talk to Nanny later. Right now, they needed to be alone and have a quiet conversation. Eileen was scared at this point because she feared that Evan would lose trust in her again. Nevertheless, they managed to escape and be alone in the kitchen. It seemed like this conversation would bring forth many revelations. Eileen looked into his eyes and started to worry that this conversation might turn into something frightening. Meanwhile, Eileen has already come to terms with the fact that she is destined to never witness the growth of two princes. However, it turns out that at that moment, he was only concerned about her not wearing the gifted dresses and jewelry. In his opinion, it could only mean one thing: she didn't like anything he gave her. In response, the girl explains that she is not ready to accept such gifts and doesn't believe she deserves them. However, in an attempt to make her feel better, the guy asks her to imagine it as a breakfast reward that surpasses any meal he has ever had. But as usual, Eileen stands her ground and refuses any kind of reward from him. When she mentions that she hasn't even touched anything, Kashar tells her about seeing one of the princes playing with toys he personally picked out for them. This revelation leaves the girl feeling uneasy and regretful for letting Louis play with those toys. To reassure her, the Duke warns her not to assume any ill intentions on his part, as he has no plans to ask for anything in return. The only thing he wouldn't refuse is some food she would personally cook for him. The girl stops crying the moment she agrees to cook for him, on the condition that she doesn't owe him anything. However, at this point, the Duke is already contemplating offering her something. He is clearly interested in seeing her as often as possible and sampling her food. The Duke confesses that he hasn't stopped thinking about it all this time. And so, he had a really interesting idea to offer her. Instead of pretending to be in love, he wanted them to actually be in love. Kashar spent the whole night thinking about how to propose this idea to her. Finally, he decided to suggest going on a little date. He asked her not to worry about any hidden motives or anything like that. Surprisingly, every time they talked, he tried to confess his feelings, but the girl misunderstood his hints. However, she agreed to the date without hesitation and tried not to think about anything that could ruin the beautiful moment. As they arrived at their destination, the girl's reaction showed that she was extremely happy and had never seen such beauty before. Duke had thought long and hard about the perfect place for their date. He wanted her to have the best experience and create lasting memories. So, he decided that going to the city center, with its many cafes, stores, and restaurants, would be the best choice. He succeeded in surprising the girl because as soon as she started looking around, she forgot about any problems or worries. She was captivated by the architecture and the lively atmosphere. Suddenly, she got so lost in the beauty that she accidentally tripped. If Duke hadn't been there, she would have hurt herself badly. Thankfully, he reacted quickly and managed to help her. Eileen felt embarrassed and apologized for not paying attention. Duke warned her to be more careful next time because he couldn't watch over her all the time. Upon reflection, she pondered whether she had been mindful of her surroundings while walking. Realizing the potential danger, he kindly offered to hold her hand in the hazardous environment. Nevertheless, his touch made it challenging for her to concentrate on his words or react accordingly. Meanwhile, she decided to stop resisting and tried to ignore the onlookers. Suddenly, she overheard their comments, realizing that everyone was focused on her and discussing the situation extensively. Although the guy attempted to divert attention, she found it difficult to disregard the scrutiny. As the conversation around her intensified, she became increasingly distressed, perceiving the judgmental gazes and negative opinions. Overwhelmed by the harsh criticism, she eventually broke down in tears, feeling utterly dejected by the unexpected cruelty of those around her. Seeking solace, she suggested visiting a nearby cafe to the Duke, hoping for a change of atmosphere and some comfort. However, he appeared preoccupied with his own thoughts, seemingly oblivious to her suggestion. Despite the circumstances, she managed to convince Kashar to accompany her to the cafe, as they had no other choice. Upon arrival, they were warmly greeted by a friendly waiter who inquired about their needs. The girl requested a table in a secluded area, where they would remain unseen and undiscovered. The waiter kindly offered to guide them to the second floor and selected a table that perfectly matched their preferences. Expressing gratitude for his assistance, the girl began to explore the surroundings, appreciating the interior of the establishment. She eagerly anticipated trying the cafe's specialties. The Duke recommended that she choose something unique and intriguing, as it would be peculiar to opt for a common dish that could easily be prepared at home. While the girl perused the menu, she couldn't help but notice the exorbitant price of ordinary water. Meanwhile, the Duke had already placed their order, including popular items. Sensing that the Duke had ordered solely for himself, the girl decided to only request a glass of water to avoid unnecessary expenses. Once they were alone, Eileen avoided making eye contact with the Duke and blamed herself for suggesting such an expensive cafe. She had been unaware of its lavish nature. Additionally, she couldn't help but remember that she was on a date, sitting across from the Duke, an unimaginable scenario for her. Consequently, she still felt a sense of unease. To comfort her, Kashar reassured her once again that she didn't need to worry about anything because it was just a date. The girl thanked him for his concern and explained that this moment was too important for her, making it difficult to relax and enjoy. At this point, the guy decided to initiate the conversation and reminded her that he had previously expressed his interest in her, which was why he had sent her so many gifts. Unfortunately, the girl misunderstood his words and thought there was some ulterior motive behind it. Just as the waiter returned to them and apologized for interrupting their conversation, he brought them some items from their order and wished them a good time. He then brought a variety of desserts for them, which the girl admired without paying much attention to the waiter's explanations. Of course, he didn't forget her glass of water, but if she had known about the delicious desserts available, she would have ordered differently. This lifted her spirits, and she was excited to try each dessert. It seemed like they weren't going anywhere until she confessed that she hadn't ordered anything for herself due to lack of money. The Duke, thinking she was joking, assured her that she could have whatever she wanted because he had ordered it not just for himself, but also for her. Eileen was pleasantly surprised by his words, but at the same time, she couldn't help but imagine how much he would have to pay for this date. She was left speechless. Kashar didn't expect her to react this way and once again asked her to just relax and not think about money or anything else that might interfere with this date. As a result, she made an effort to heed his advice and decided to proceed with the long-awaited tasting session. Eileen realizes that each of these desserts may be so delicious that the next day she won't be able to continue eating the usual store-bought sweets. They certainly don't compare to these works of art in either flavor or appearance, but surprisingly, as soon as she ate one bite, she immediately thought about something. But could she really dislike something that much? Eileen felt that these desserts and their flavor were not as perfect as she had imagined them to be. She immediately wondered what could be the reason. After all, it was very strange. They turned out to be not bad, using expensive ingredients, but for some reason, there was something missing in the flavor. She looked closely at these brownies and didn't understand what was the matter. But what was most unexpected and surprising was that some of them were worse than the very ordinary desserts she bought herself every day. She became very interested, and the girl even suggested that if you use expensive ingredients, it does not guarantee that the result will be appropriate. Sometimes it is the case. And when the moment came to speak her mind, the Duke asked why she had no reaction to these dishes. To which the girl replied that everything was so delicious that she had even forgotten to comment on it. The girl suggested that he try the dessert and asked for his opinion. The guy agreed and took a small bite to see if it was as delicious as she claimed. The girl anxiously watched his reaction, wondering if she was subtly hinting that the desserts weren't as good as they thought. She looked into his eyes, hoping he understood everything, but he remained silent and looked back at her. Eileen felt embarrassed once again, sitting so close to him. She couldn't help but think he was the most attractive guy she had ever seen. Now that they were on a date, she wanted to talk about it and understand what it all meant. However, he still hadn't said anything, and it seemed intentional. There must be a reason why he asked her out. Eileen still couldn't comprehend why she was here instead of someone more high class. To clear up any misunderstandings, she turned to him and asked him to answer her questions honestly. She wanted him to confess the real reason for the date. The girl was certain that she was nothing special and he wasn't here for love or her looks. She believed there were many other girls who were better and prettier than her. However, the boy hesitated to comment because he didn't know how she would react to the truth. He remained so quiet that it started to feel uncomfortable. She attempted to grab his attention, but he responded with a smirk, implying that she couldn't be easily fooled by mere kindness. Little did he know, she recognized his true personality from the novel. His acting skills were impressive, showing that he had put in some effort. She bluntly asked if he was interested in someone, urging him to speak up quickly as she needed to go home and feed her children. With no other option in sight, he finally confessed that the Empress wanted him to get married. The Empress was particular about finding a suitable match, and the name of Empress Wayeno immediately came to her mind, sent the disposed Kashar to die on the battlefield. only for him to return as a victorious Grand Duke. Having a woman from the Empress's faction as the Grand Duchess was akin to having an official spy by one's side. Annoyed, she questioned why she was chosen for this role. He reminded her of her claim that she was his longtime lover, to which she retorted that it was nonsense, despite his good looks. She expressed concern for her twins, but he simply stated that he enjoyed her cooking and found her amusing. As the sun began to set, he dropped her off at her home, leaving her feeling bewildered, especially when she couldn't stop entertaining inappropriate thoughts about him. She made the decision to decline his proposal. However, upon returning home, she noticed Emma surrounded by a group of women. Eileen, the maid in charge, approached them, the woman with a sinister smile, and read a letter stating that Lady Lemang had invited the two princes to a special party. The maids were shocked. It was an exclusive event held annually by Madame Lemang, a prominent figure in the cultural society. Each family was expected to bring gifts, unique beverages, and dishes made with secret ingredients. In the original novel, the boys had been invited to this very party. But Evan was injured protecting Louis from a decorative knife held by a nobleman. Unfortunately, it wasn't an accident to impress Empress Wayano. She invited the princes and covered up the incident as a fight, but it's odd that incident happens when they're 8, 10 months later in the spring. Could the original novel have changed?